I want people to learn from my mistakes and how I've dealt poorly with the subject of NFP.
NFP can be very, very challenging for some couples, and it's really easy for other couples.
From my perspective, it's probably the hardest thing about marriage. Kick it off.
All right, let's start up. Fire it up.
Morning. You know the sound of this?
Mm-hmm. That means we have notes. Which means Chad will be doing most of the talking, and I'm just going to sip my coconut oil-laced coffee.
So why are we doing this podcast in general? Why are we doing Catholic Dad podcast, Jeff? So this is the Catholic Dad podcast.
The overall Catholic Dad podcast. And this is Jeff.
And in general, we do this Catholic Dad podcast thing. I'm not doing the time. Let me change this over to time.
I was just checking to see our balance because my microphone's a lot closer to my mouth than it is to you. So hopefully we're okay.
Yeah, I think we're good. Why are we doing this? Because
I get to hang out with my buddy Chad once a week for an hour, and we get to listen to the sounds of our own voices.
And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then also to share our faith and hopefully inspire and maybe change some minds if we get along to it. But I'll be humble enough to think that might be a rare occasion.
Yeah, definitely.
But being out there and just sharing our faith really is what it comes down to. But for me, the enjoyment is to be able to, in a sense, self-reflect a little bit as well on our faith. And, we've talked about it outside of the podcast. Maybe this is another podcast topic. But, because of doing this podcast with you, how that's shaped and helped my faith and my faith journey over the last year. Because we're coming up on a year, getting closer and closer to that milestone of doing this for a year now that we're back after taking a 4-year hiatus or whatever it was. It's, hopefully those folks that are out there listening, we're hearing from you and you're sending us emails, and we love that.
Yeah.
But hope we're creating a community around this, and that's what the intent was.
Yeah. Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. And I think, not to take anything away from any of the previous topics that we've ever done, but there are certain topics that we have purposefully not touched. And I'll be real and say, because they're scary. Mm-hmm. These are scary topics, and, it's like, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to maybe make my wife feel uncomfortable. These are like two of the big reasons why the topics that we're about to launch into have not come up until now. But I feel it's like, especially now that we are starting to hear from people. So we know that people are out there listening,
right.
So thank you.
Yep.
There are people listening. So it's like, okay, people are listening to what we're saying, and let's make sure that what we're saying really does have an impact. Mm-hmm. So today, which this will be released on July 6th. So today is July 6th, or the weekend after that, so 6 or 7, something like that.
So happy birthday, America. Hope you all had a nice July 4th.
Absolutely, yeah. Independence Day, amen. Which ties back to the last podcast, where our freedom was paid for by somebody else's blood, the country and our souls, right?
Yep, absolutely.
July this year, and July in particular, marks the 50th anniversary of Humanae Vitae. So Humanae Vitae came out on July 25th of 1968.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So, and so what we're going to be talking about today is NFP.
Yep.
Natural family planning.
Well, in maybe a series, we'll see how it kind of falls out. There's so much here that there's a lot. We'll just see where it goes, and we'll see where it continues to go.
The way I think we should do it, and maybe it won't happen this way, is that we will have a break. We're gonna continue it with the next podcast. I think there's enough for 3 podcasts, but it's not going to be necessarily on NFP. Today I want to talk particularly about NFP, but I think that the series is going to be basically on Humanae Vitae, because Humanae Vitae is this encyclical, this great encyclical by Blessed Paul VI, and it talks about our sexuality and the importance of the husband-wife relationship, and it's a great encyclical. I encourage everybody to go out and read it. But this topic today, I want to focus specifically on natural family planning. So, Jeff, what is NFP?
Quiz show. So to build off a little bit of what you said as well. So it's not just our wives; it's also our kids. It's also everything else. So we'll try to keep this, as Catholic dads, we'll keep it as a podcast that hopefully would be, older kids will be, to the level of your family's discussion or whatever. We're going to keep it to that level, right? So natural family planning is, using the body's natural cycles of fertility and infertility, and using that to space children or to decide to have children. So there's been an incredible amount of research. It's one of the things for me. The science behind it is that we're both engineers, we're both scientific people. We've been living that life as well, and so the proof is in the pudding in that sense as well. As the science is real, right? This isn't we get as Catholics mocked and ridiculed a lot of times for this, but is as much or more science around NFP as there is any other of the contraceptive methods without all of the downsides. So, natural family planning basically uses the woman's natural cycle. There's fertile periods of that cycle and there's infertile periods of that cycle. And as a married couple, you decide, prayerfully is what the church asks us to do about the size of our families. And if we're choosing to abstain from having children, then you simply abstain from the marital act in the periods of fertile time. Yeah. It allows for the married couple to be, I think, both spiritually but also mentally more open to life. So one of the stories, and this is from our family, we had one of our family members married a Catholic, and they had to go through marriage prep and all this kind of stuff. And she posted a bunch of stuff about having to sit through the NFP class, right? And this is a modern, kind of sensibility, which you hear all the time. Was like, I'm really going to listen to a lady tell me about how natural family planning works who has 7 kids. So it's two sides of that. When you practice NFP, you're generally going to be more open to that life anyway. It's just, that's the natural thing. I shouldn't use natural in terms of that term, but it comes from that. So if you're using natural family planning, there's an understanding that you're allowing God to come into that act as well. And, you're open to that as well. Using any sort of artificial means of contraception or sterilization is really, you're saying that door is closed forever. And it's highly unlikely that, you're going to have any sort of children from that. And, for me, all of the other methods, really, there's a lot of science coming out about those. Maybe that'll be a whole separate kind of deal, but especially with the pill and the hormone changes that occur because of that, the infertility that can happen later because of that. There's been some really interesting studies about what women who are on the pill find attractive in a mate versus what women who aren't on the pill find attractive, and what happens when a couple comes together while she's on the pill, and then what happens later in their marriage if she stops taking the pill. And there's a lot of interesting research about that, where it really just changes a lot of the things that women find attractive, and how much of that contributes to marital problems and other things, right, later down the road. And then there's all the other, there's all these other methods, and all of them have side effects, right? They're all medical interventions. When your body was designed and it has, a means of doing that without any sort of artificial interference. Yeah. Fair enough?
Oh, man, Jeff just nailed it. So if you, just to say, congrats on that answer. Fantastic answer. I researched this topic and I couldn't have said it, any better. And you did it just off the top of your head. Well done. Kudos. So in short, NFP, like if you're talking to somebody that's, brand new dad and they're trying to get their head around this thing, it's basically, as a Catholic, we don't believe in artificial contraception.
Yep.
But there's another way, and we call it NFP. Yep. So you wrap that up.
So fascinating is probably not the right word, but the research is there, the science is there, and there's several different. I don't know if you're going to get into the details, but there's several different methods, and honestly, we shouldn't get into the techniques and tricks and all that. You can go, that's why there's NFP classes at your church, and they're usually 3 to 4 weekends or something. They'll really teach it good. But this knowledge it can't be a modern knowledge. This knowledge had to have been, I would like to think, part of our human existence from the beginning, because artificial contraception really only came in historically within the last couple hundred years or whatever. And obviously the pill is only within the last, 60 years or 70 years, right? So this knowledge had to have been there, midwives, woman to woman, sharing this knowledge historically, at some point it had to be there. So we're just we're literally following the path that humans have followed forever to manage the size of their families. And that, for my, that's a connection back to our roots of what we are as humans as well.
Yeah.
So.
In the research that I did, in the extensive internet research, to quote Father Nathan, actually, they claim that contraception has been around for hundreds of years, hundreds and hundreds of years. And they go into how people used to try to make condoms out of a fish bladder or some crazy thing like that. But yeah, so here's where we are in history. So let's go back in time to 1968 and Pope Paul VI, his release Humanae Vitae. And I just want to read the opening of Humanae Vitae right here. I got it. It says, "The transmission of human life is a most serious role in which married people collaborate freely and responsibly with God the Creator. It has always been a source of great joy to them, even though it sometimes entails many difficulties and hardships. The fulfillment of this duty has always posed problems to the conscience of married people, but the recent course of human society and the concomitant changes have provoked new questions. The Church cannot ignore these questions, for they concern matters intimately connected with life and happiness of human beings." So, he talks about how it's a joy, and he also talks about how it can be difficult.
Yep.
And that's really what I want. That's really where I want to drive this podcast, because I think too often in this society of social media, and it's everybody wants to show their best face.
Yep.
And the spirit of what our tagline is, which we're just trying to keep it real.
Yep.
It's not always easy.
Yep.
It's hard. It's very difficult.
Right.
Sometimes. But anyway, let's go back to that. So, what were the new questions that Pope Paul was talking about? So I'm not going to read verbatim where it goes into, but it's number one. It goes into the fear of overpopulation.
Right.
So again, this is 1968. The whole
late great planet Earth
overpopulation thing. So they were scared of overpopulation. They just being society in general. The second one was the cost of living, and I don't remember. I've read this is actually the only encyclical I've ever read, and I read it years and years ago, and I actually have forgotten most of it. Sorry, but just keeping it real.
Yeah.
But the second one was the cost of living, how it had increased,
right,
and then that it's harder to provide for a large family,
right,
which I didn't really remember that. So that was another big question, and. They also talk about the government in there, so giving over, basically letting the government choose for you what's best for your, basically for your fertility. Things that just should be between a husband and wife, the government should maybe be involved in those decisions, but also the introduction and widespread use and acceptance of artificial contraception, namely the birth control pill.
Right.
Okay, so here's what was happening at the time. In 1960, the first oral contraceptive, which was called Innovid, was approved by the FDA. So that's 1960. So here we have, 1960, the pill is approved by the FDA. In 1965, the Supreme Court gave married couples the right to use birth control. And then in 1968, so that's the year the encyclical was released and published, the FDA approved IUDs, the intrauterine devices on the market. So that's just a quick snapshot of what was happening in the 60s.
Yep.
And that's what was being basically the background. All these questions were coming up. What about, population over population and this and that. And now, we have this very easy way to control that.
Right.
So that was what was framing this thing. So I guess we're, and we're actually at the end of my note taking section. So the rest of this is going to be just really what what do I want to convey to people? And it's like, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this particular topic? Yes. But why as Catholic dads do we, and as Catholic couples, why do we believe in NFP? Why do we follow that? Why do we take that as, this is the way we're going to do it? Is it in the Bible?
Right.
Things like that. I mean, obviously, this could be a very huge topic, but my takeaways from this is it goes to the what Pope Paul said was going to happen, what he warned what would happen.
It was very prophetic.
It was so prophetic. So he says that, number one, you're going to have an increase in infidelity. And number two, you're going to have the degradation of the way a man views a woman and her body, and is basically just going to be able to, it's going to turn it into, I'm using this for my pleasure. So it's basically the objectification of women. And both of those have happened.
Absolutely.
Since this. So, I mean, I'll just kick it over to you. I mean, I've talked a lot, but really where I want to go from here on out is like just to talk about like it's hard. It's hard. We're going to talk about maybe some difficulties that we have, but I mean, this is the reason why we do it, because there are truths. I mean, he spoke it back in 1968, and I'm telling you, it came true. We have the explosion of infidelity. We have the explosion of basically objectification of women with pornography. And, just get your thoughts on this.
So there's just so much here.
Get your head around.
I think one of the things, case in point is Catholic dads, and something we need to watch out for. I'm trying to think about what directions I want to go here. I guess I'll just talk. The first thing is there's, to what you're talking about, the hookup culture and the explosion of STDs. There's been headlines, and there's a billboard I have to drive by every freaking day, driving home from work, that's all about, the antibiotic resistant stuff. And it's super scary, and it's prolific, right? So, the hookup culture, the Tinder culture, all of this stuff, STDs are going crazy. And he talked about that as well, right? If I remember in the encyclical, maybe there was something else about it. But so for sure, that's one thing, that's come from that. And I would say, so certainly the objectification of women, I would say there's been a change in the relationship of also how women see their sexuality as well, and becoming more masculine in terms of that. And so, and obviously not speaking from experience here, but just looking at the culture, and the Me Too movement and everything else, that all of that has come from this. And so you've got, the actresses and the women that put themselves out there as, very, trying to frame the thought here as I'm thinking about it, but they put themselves out there to be viewed. They put themselves out there in the dresses, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to wear burqas. Don't take me to that extent, but they do that. But then also don't recognize on the other side, what that portrays. And so there's kind of like almost like a chivalry type conversation here, where chivalry used to be a certain code of conduct that men had and a certain code of conduct that women had, and it defined that relationship and how we interacted, and all of that's been blown away. There's just as many female people on Tinder and these dating apps as there are as men, or else they wouldn't work, right? And that's all something that wouldn't have happened 100 years ago. So I think that's really a change in the culture, and we need to watch that. I obviously don't have any daughters, but for our daughters as well, we need to make sure that they really honor it. It's much more difficult, I think, in this culture for a young woman to understand how to honor herself in this culture with all of the social media and everything else that they see, as it is for men are men, and the culture almost expects us to be failures at this point. So, so it's much harder for to get that, the purity in having those conversations with the daughters, I think, and from my experience. And all of this comes from that. As far as married couple, and of course we know, there'll be a whole different podcast topic, I think, is how you interact with this. But he talks about the government. He talks about the Supreme Court being, suing to allow married couples. This is all a very private decision that happens between the married couples. And as Catholic dads, we're talking about it. We're opening up that privacy to all of our listeners, so that you can think about it in your own marriages. And really, that's the only part of that, right? There's there's lots of friends and acquaintances that we know in the church that are everywhere, again, on that spectrum of, you've got the folks that are so pro NFP, that's kind of their thing, and so they'll talk about it and they'll bring it up and et cetera, et cetera. And then there's, Catholic people, for whatever reasons, they've decided, that, either in the past, they made a sterilization choice, but now they understand that was wrong, and they can't really go back, and you could, but for whatever reasons they've decided not to, or there were friends that have started contraception very, very early and young, and then when they were finally ready to have children, the impact of that has been infertility and other issues and that sort of thing. So we know these people and we know these experiences. We know it's very private. So at least for me, this isn't a preachy, this is the way that you have to do it. The church says this is the way we should do it. And from our experience, it's very difficult. And we'll talk about that, since we're already kind of running up against the clock already. I think, the challenges as Catholic dads, we can talk about as a separate podcast, and how, maybe with some, not too personal experiences, how you manage that, how you live that. Because, there's a pressure from the outside of the marriage with society that we constantly fight as a couple that does NFP, and that's really, I think that's where the friction comes the most. Yeah. Is, society says we don't have to do this. And so just like, the guy that's driving the speed limit on the highway because I'm going to do the speed limit and I'm going to follow the rules, and everybody's zipping past you, honking your horn and getting to work 20 minutes early. You get that feeling sometimes as a family that does NFP, right?
Yeah. So I would say that what I want to do, it does merit more, and we are running a little bit long on time, but not quite. So I want to leave what I've got titled here on my notes is what I want to say. Mm-hmm. So I want people to learn from my mistakes, and how I've dealt poorly with the subject of NFP. So I want everybody out there to know, if you're a Catholic dad out there and you're got your head up against this and it's coming up, or it's looming large, or it's heavy on your marriage. So number one, this is, from my perspective, is probably the hardest thing about marriage.
Absolutely. In the Catholic Church.
Thing about marriage.
Yep.
For me.
Yep.
Full stop.
Yep.
Okay.
I was going to mention this too, but there's definitely the parable of the two brothers, and the one where God says, or the dad says, I need you to go work in the field, and the one son says, sure, I'll go do it, and he takes off, right? And then the other son,
and he doesn't do it,
and the other son is like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do it, and then does it anyway.
Yes.
I've always thought of myself as that second guy.
Fantastic insight.
Because it's so hard.
Yeah,
right?
It is. It's very hard, y'all. So we got to recognize that and put it out there for what it is. I'd say that it's good. And I'm going to talk about this from the aspect of to try to avoid pregnancy. Mm-hmm. Okay, but
exactly.
Yes, you can use it to find that fertile period and try life
and conceive.
But conceive. Thank you. But you can also use it whenever, as Jeff said in the beginning, to not conceive during the fertile periods. So that means abstaining from the marital act during those fertile periods. So, that's where I'm talking about it from, and that's where it's going to be difficult for a man, to do this. So we're talking to Catholic dads here. But it puts a regulator on your passions, right? It's like fasting from food. It's like during Lent, you're giving up these things, you're doing these sacrifices. And you know what? That's what guys do. That's what men do.
Yep.
Men sacrifice.
Yep.
And so it's like whenever you find yourself in the throes of this, and you're up against the passions that are coming out in you, and maybe the friction that's coming out in the relationship because of this. We have to step back and say, this is a sacrifice, and recognize it as a sacrifice, and move forward. And hopefully that will help. You can't do this without communicating with your wife.
Yep.
If you don't communicate with your wife on your feelings, and she communicates back to you her feelings, you're not going to be able to get past this. You know,
Yeah.
not to say get past this. You're not going to be able to have peace with it, to have a decision. You might build resentment, and that's a bad thing.
So let me interject really quick on that. So obviously we're Catholic dads, so this is coming from our perspective. But let's not minimize that this is hard on our wives as well. So there's a number of things hormonally that goes on through the cycle, and in the fertile period has, you know, some hormonal influences and everything else on the female as well. And so it's not necessarily easy for the female either. And there was a really good article I was going to try to find, so maybe we can reference it in the next time we do this. But it was written from a wife's perspective,
Okay.
which was basically like, and it was almost verbatim the same conversation that we're having, which is, you know, I really don't like this. I really don't, you know, it's really hard. You know, it's not something that, you know, I would have chosen myself. But there's no other alternative, right? I'm not going to use oral contraceptives because I know what hormones. I'm not going to put a foreign body into my body because of the things that I'm not going to do forced sterilization. There's nothing wrong with my body. It doesn't need to be fixed, right? And all she made all these arguments, but there was some really good, and so I'll try to find it next time. We'll just reference it. But it was really good from
awesome.
the wife's perspective too. So as a dad, you know, let's not make it all about ourselves.
Right. And I actually, my next one, it's funny that you jumped in because my next one was look at it from their point of view.
Yep.
So that was great that you jumped in. So I don't need to cover that one. But maybe to add a little bit to it is we had a conversation. I told Kim that we were going to do this podcast.
Yeah.
Last night I told it to her.
Nice.
And we had a conversation which went from really, you know, her point of view, she was giving me some really good insight to a very, you know, personal and heated part on my side. It's just got to be real again. But then we brought it back down and tied it together, and it was awesome. But like from her perspective, it's, you know, what do they think? You know, what's going on in their minds whenever the potential for getting pregnant comes up, and you know, you as a husband are ready for the marital act. What goes through their mind could be, are you ready for 18 years?
Right.
You know, and honestly, I didn't think of it that way. And the other thing that I would say is on my side, and where you can learn from my mistake, gentlemen that are out there listening, is don't take it to the extreme. So whenever you're having that conversation, and it's a difficult conversation, yes, don't jump off the back and say, so we're never going to have sex again.
Right.
Because you know what? You will. And just be patient. So, I mean, I'm saying that now, but I mean, I'm saying this now less than 12 hours after having said that phrase.
Right.
Okay? Again, I'm just keeping it real here. So find some other outlet for that energy. You know, go work out, go run. Right. Spend time reading books with the kids. I mean, find something productive to do.
Right.
I know, other than mull over that. And just I would just say again, go back to the sacrifice. This is a sacrifice.
Yeah.
It is not easy. You're going to find people out there that are going to make it look like this is great, and we love NFP. And it's awesome. And you know what? Those people were probably out there. But if you don't feel that way, it's okay.
So I'm going to push back really hard on that because one, those people are kind of annoying, right? But in the Catholic experience, you will come across the like super pro NFP family that wants you to know like the whole story, and they're very, at least in our experience, they're very transparent about like where they're even at. Like, I don't need to know all this stuff, right? And that we're keeping it like at a very high we're not getting, as far as I'm concerned in this podcast, we're keeping it real, but there hasn't been a lot of private stuff that we've had to share, and that's not appropriate, right? I know that there's women with all kinds of different cycles and all kinds of different challenges, and NFP can be very, very challenging for some couples, and it's really easy for other couples, and that's just, because it's biology, it's very dependent on biology, and it's very dependent on the differences in biology, and we have to understand that. There's couples we've met that, their biology has just been very, very challenging, and that sacrifice, really was too much, and so they decided as a married couple to do something else. And that was their choice within their marital couple, right? But to go back to that idea, when you, as a Catholic dad or even as a Catholic couple, if you're struggling with this, one of the most difficult things to come across is the couple that's overjoyed to be doing NFP and think it's the most amazing thing, and you know, they'll go into all of the theological arguments and they'll talk to you all about how beautiful life is, and you know, on and on and on. And whether they have a bunch of kids or not, you know, that can be really, really demoralizing. And so what I would say is that you never know what's happening behind closed doors in any couple and in any marriage. And so as generally as Catholic dads, you know, if there's the family that's out there, the couple that's out there, you know, and they're putting themselves out publicly, you know, in the square as, you know, this is amazing, we're doing this all the time, we're doing, you know, just remember that you don't really know, right? You don't know their history, you don't know what the struggles they went through to get to that point, which may be way more difficult than the struggles that you've been through. But you also don't know that, you know, that could be a ministry, and then they could go home and have just as good a fight as any of us have had, you know, the next weekend. So, you know, I would just try to, you know, when you're keeping it real, or if, you know, you're trying to make that decision, you know, maybe you're currently using contraception, and, you know, this is something that as a Catholic dad you're feeling called to, but, you know, how do we start? How do we have that conversation? Where do we go? You know, it's such a big change. It's super scary. Yeah. You know, find a balance between the folks that teach the class that think it's the greatest thing ever, right? And the folks that have struggled with it and have had hard difficulty with it. Find a balance there, because you need to get both, and you need to understand that that's really what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's really all I was prepared to say on this podcast.
I think that works.
We have some other topics that will spin from that
that
we can talk about next time. But I believe we have a shout out.
We do. So let's do two. One is, well, so maybe, and I don't know if we should go here, but I'm going to anyway. So I think we should make a challenge to the Catholic Stuff You Should Know guys, because they haven't done an NFP podcast yet, right?
Really? They haven't?
I don't think so. They've talked about it. I don't know if they have. So we need to go look. So if they haven't, then we should do like a challenge, because we got there first. But yeah, so we do have a shout out. I won't use your full name, Brian, because of the very personal email that you sent us, and I just wanted to let you know, Brian, that we got your email, and we're praying for you. We're praying for everything that you guys are going through, and you know, hopefully through those prayers and everything, you can feel a little bit of that grace and support coming at you. So thank you, Brian. Thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing everything that's going on in your life with us. It means a lot to us that you did that. And please know that you've been in our thoughts and prayers this whole week that we got your note. And, you know, please stay in contact with us and let us know. As we said in the previous podcast, you know, we'd love to do something for you and help out. So continue to reach out to us, and we'll be here, okay? So anyway, on that, God bless you all. Thank you for listening. Find us on Facebook. You know, the Facebook algorithms need you to like, share, and comment in order for us to continue to reach out. So if you're not seeing Catholic Dad podcasts in your feed, you go to the page and go through the posts that you find, like them, make a quick comment, you know, just a quick amen comment in that note is all we need, and that's going to tell Facebook that you're engaged with us, and that Facebook needs to put more stuff on your feed you can see us.
And the iTunes store as well, or wherever you get your podcast, if you can like us and comment on that, it's all algorithm. So if we are reaching people, which I know we are, I mean, you know, people are starting to comment, email, and reach out to us. So the more people do that, the more we will be visible to other people. So it's like when somebody's looking for a topic about Catholic parenting, fatherhood, Catholic dads, whatever, we want our podcast to pop up on their search. And so the more you comment, the more you like and you know, all of that, what Jeff was just saying, it really is going to go a long way. And that's what we're doing this for, is to try to reach people with the gospel of Christ. And pray for us, and we'll pray for you.
All right. Saint Joseph, pray for us.